Elizabeth Bishop was born February 8, 1911 in Worcester, Massachusetts. She was a well-known poet who published only 101 poems in her lifetime. She didn't focus on quantity, but would spend her long periods of time perfecting the quality of one work.
This relates to her work of poetry, The Fish. Elizabeth Bishop uses words and phrases such as battered, skin hanging like ancient wallpaper, stained, lost through age, speckled with barnacles, and infested with sea lice to describe a fish she had caught that some may see as imperfect, but to her, she's seen it as pure perfection and a promise.
This flawed fish was also a representation of how Elizabeth Bishop saw herself. Bishop comes from a broken home with a difficult past. Her father died when she was a baby, and at 5 years old, she seen her mother for the last time due to her mother's mental instability, forcing her to be shipped to a mental institution.
Because of her rough childhood, her maternal grandparents from Nova Scotia took her in. However, her well-off paternal grandparents from Massachusetts were concerned of the limited financial and educational availability that Bishop could receive in Nova Scotia, so they took her in and sheltered her from the world.
Elizabeth Bishop wrote about the moment her sheltered lifestyle was altered in her poem, In the Waiting Room. While waiting for her Aunt Consuelo in the dentist's office, her eyes were opened by a National Geographic, seeing things such as vivid volcanoes, a dead man hung on a pole, babies with pointed heads, and women with necks wound round with wire.
This was the moment her sheltered bubble was bursted, and she realized that there was more out in the world than what she had ever experienced. That was the starting place of her traveler's heart. She later went on to travel places such as Spain, Italy, North Africa, and even lived in Brazil for 14 years.
So how is this history important, you may ask? Let's go back and take a glance at the two specific pieces. After Bishop catches this imperfect, perfect fish, she begins to describe the fight other fishers had saying. From his lip hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 in a wire leader with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks drawn firmly in his mouth.
She goes on to say that he broke the lines and he got away. This fight also represents the fight that Elizabeth Bishop had within herself, a fight for stability in her life, a fight of barely knowing her parents, and a fight of how she viewed herself, battered and lost through age.
But after viewing this fight to death fish who continued to get away, she said victory filled up that little rented boat. She had caught this uncatchable fish until everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go.
It was at that moment that a common bond was found between the fish and the fisher who represents Bishop. Both were determined. For the fish, he was determined to not be caught, to always fight. For Bishop, she was determined to make something of herself. However, both had a moment where they had given up.
Then a rainbow, a moment of a promise for a second chance for both the fish and the fisher, so she let the fish go.
Just like the fish poem connected to Elizabeth Bishop's life, so did In the Waiting Room. Bishop really was trying to find her place in the world. As previously stated, it was quite different from her reality. When she was describing the long pig, babies with pointed head, and women with wire wrapped around their neck, she could not help but wonder how could she live in a world with people who were so different from her.
While Elizabeth Bishop was writing the poem In the Waiting Room, she used words like we were falling, like she was hesitant trying to really comprehend what she was reading. She was literally falling out of her own childhood and entering adulthood. The National Geographic made her view life from a different perspective.
When she heard her Aunt Consuelo's voice, She tried to come back to familiar ground, but she no longer could. She even tried to tell herself over and over again, "You'll be 7 years old," but that did not work either. Once her bubble was bursted, there was no turning back. When Elizabeth was pointing out similarities, the boots, hands, family voice, she realized that all these things held us together. Maybe, just maybe, this world is not as different as it appeared to be.
Although it says it seems like she came back to her comfort zone when she states it was still the 5th of February 1918, she now had a new sense of reality, which allowed her to explore so many places around the world.
The fish and in the waiting room both connect to different stages of Elizabeth Bishop's life. Whether it was looking at herself or looking at the world, both poems demonstrate a sense of growth in Bishop, and both of these poems acted as foundation blocks for who she became.
Although she had a hard start in life, she used that to fuel a fire inside of her, and that is what makes her the famous poet we all know her as.